Hey everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and sorry that this one's a little later today, but let's go ahead and hop into the third to last Greenskins Q&A video, which this one's going to be about the Greenskins relationships with different races or species or what have you. So let's go ahead and get into it. Yeah, a little late today because we've got all sorts of tornadoes and nasty weather down here in Texas, but still got power, so that's nice. Our first question today comes from Leeroy, who asks, are there any Greenskins who came along with other races such as the High Elves or Men of the Empire? So, I remember this one because I think what it was a slight mistype in what he meant to ask is if there are Greenskins who get along with, like, order races. And the honest question is not really. No. Greenskins just like to smash and attack people almost without any exceptions. Like, if you have a civilization, the Greenskins are going to attack you. Just because to them, it's a target. Especially because you're going to want to defend your stuff, and they're going to want to take your stuff. So, especially races that are highly civilized and really do not have a society that allows reckless, endless violence just constantly going on in the streets, they're not going to get along with Greenskins. So there are definitely no groups among the order races who are going to have friends among the Greenskins. We'll get into some of the people who they are friends with later on. Next up, we got Dreadnautilus, who asks, are there any sources detailing what the Goblins think about their gnoblar cousins? So I believe we answered this a few videos ago, but TLDR is that the Goblins really like to pick on the gnoblars, because the gnoblars are the smallest species of Greenskin except for snotlings. And gnoblars are also known as hill goblins, so sometimes those get mixed up. But gnoblars really don't like other Greenskins, because other Greenskins just beat the tar out of them, kill them on a very, very regular basis, and will eat them, or just mass slaughter them. And goblins really like to torture them. That's why the gnoblars ended up, when they met the ogres, the gnoblars ended up forming that symbiotic relationship with them. The ogres protect the gnoblars primarily from greenskins and then just like random predators. Next up, we've got Alin Bobaru. What do the orcs think of the various nations of men? Do they even make a difference? Well, funny enough, the Greenskins do recognize the difference between the different realms of men, though the only way they generally can tell them apart is by the way they dress and how ard they are. In that Greenskins, especially orcs, tend to categorize different species or different nations by how good they are at fighting, which is referred to ardness or dead ardness. So the tougher you are to defeat in battle, typically in close combat, the more dead ard you are. And if you're really, really tough, you're really dead ard, Greenskins are going to flock at the opportunity to fight you, which is not great. But on the other hand, if you're really weak, the Greenskins will view you as an easy target to hit up if they're looking for resources or they're just bored. So that's also not great. But when it comes to the nations of men in particular, orcs are really not very respectful of most nations of men. And the only two that they really acknowledge as being really interesting or individualistic are the Men of the Empire and the Bretonnians. So the Bretonnians are actually the Greenskins' favorite of the nations of men, not including Norska. Norska I count as a Warriors of Chaos situation, but of the civilized realms of men, the Bretonnians are by far their favorite to mess with, because the Bretonnians are the most sporting. You know, they don't use ranged weapons, only the peasants do. They very rarely rely on siege weapons. They don't have gunpowder and stuff like that. They just get on horses and they just slam into you and they fight hard. And a lot of their best troops are superhuman, so they can provide a really fun challenge for Greenskins. Goblins really don't like Bretonnia that much. Goblins are very scared of Bretonians generally because Bretonians ride on horses, which make them very, very large. And goblins do not like large things that are capable of just mass murdering them. So generally, orcs really, really like Bretonnia, and that's actually a big part of why Bretonnia has such a bad orc problem compared to most of the other realms of men. And it doesn't help, of course, that Bretonnia has a big ol' mountain range right in the middle of their kingdom, or the southern middle of their kingdom, known as Massive Orcal, which you can see now in Total War. They added it fairly recently. And that is one of the most rooted in dens of orcs in the world. Like, there are so many orcs in Massive Orcal. And while the Empire does have an orc problem, compared to Bretonnia, it's nothing. Like, the Empire, most of the orcs are through Blackfire Pass or up in the mountain ranges. The Empire has much more of a goblin problem. But Bretonnia, much more of an orc problem. As for the southern realms, Tilia, Astalia, and the Border Princes are really not liked by the Greenskins, generally because they're not very sporting. And there's nothing really iconic about them. Like, they rely on really unconventional weapons, either with their gunpowder or with lots and lots of mercenaries. And the thing about the Border Princes especially is that they rely very heavily on walled settlements. Like, they have nothing but walled settlements. Whereas Tilia and Astalia are so far away from most of the really notable orc tribes that they don't really see a lot of action from orcs. They do get attacked by orcs, but generally the only time Greenskins are going to make it to Tilia and Astalia is when they've already built up a massive amount of steam that allows them to get through all of the dwarven kingdoms that are in the middle black and the middle mountains, the black mountains, and the vaults. Because those dwarves kind of provide a layer of protection for those realms, which is why in Tilia and Astalia you really don't, they're considered the nicest place to retire to, or kind of the most peaceful realms that have a lot more issues with just like flagrant corruption and merchants. But of course they do have much more of a Skaven problem, with Skaven Blight being next, right smack between the two of them. So beyond that, the Empire is fairly well liked by Greenskins as an opponent, just because their pretty cities burn nicely, as they say in the Greenskin trailer, and they're kind of like the big bad for a lot of Greenskins because of the Legend of Sigmar, or just because going through Blackfire Pass, you're gonna get a good fight out of a ridiculously large nation of men. And of course there's the Legend of Gorbad Ironclaw, which motivates a lot of Greenskins to go up there to try and recreate or do better than he did. And Gorbad wiped out an entire province, so the province of Solent got just annihilated by Gorbad. So that's generally how they feel about most of them. The only way they really tell them apart is Greenskins tend to refer to Bretonians. I think they tend to call them either canned knights or canned men or tin cans or something along those lines. They have a really goofy word for them. I can't remember what it is, but they have a specific word for Bretonians. And then the Umis in the Empire, as they call them, are very famous for their like really poofy outfits and their like really over the top dress and hats and stuff. The Greenskins are very entertained by that. But nobody is quite as flamboyant as the Southern Realms, but the Southern Realms also don't see the Greenskins as much. But the last thing is that to talk about the Northern tribes, so like Norska and Kislev and stuff, they are considered a good fight by the Greenskins, but they're really out of the way for them. So while the Greenskins really do enjoy getting a fight against those guys, the thing is that the Northern Realms deal with so much chaos and there's like so many monsters and mutations and all sorts of other crazy things up there, that it can be really difficult for the Greenskins to get up there in the first place, and a lot of them sometimes consider that a little bit too much. They're looking for more of a grounded fight sometimes. And plus the Northern Realms don't have a lot of loot. It is possible for Greenskins to starve or to run into issues if they don't have any resources to loot. So there you go. Hopefully that answers that. Next up, we got ShaneisImperium, who asks, let's see. What are all the races relations? Okay, what are all the other races outlook? There we go. On the Greenskins, and have any of the races made some sort of alliance / coalition with a warboss or a Waagh? So, long story short, is that all of the races in Warhammer view the Greenskins as an abominable menace. Now, there's kind of a sliding scale on that, where some races are either consider the Greenskins inferior enough to them that they don't really care about them, or the race themselves, like for Skaven, are so deplorable or violent on their own that they're willing to put up with the Greenskins, to then like the ogres, who are basically Greenskins, but instead of being obsessed with fighting, they're obsessed with eating, even though ogre culture is also very centric around fighting. So I would say that most races absolutely hate them and view them as a menace that if they had the ability to exterminate them, they would jump at it, because the Greenskins are just super unreliable neighbors, and if they're to be next to Greenskins means to constantly be fighting them in battle, unless there's something you're able to negotiate, which some races have. You know, the Skaven in particular have managed to negotiate alliances with, say, night goblins from time to time. It's very rare, but it does happen. But that being said, just like Skaven, Greenskins make unreliable allies at the best of times. Even if you've had a great relationship with them and you both have a mutual understanding and you're both benefiting from it, there's still a pretty good chance they're going to backstab you at some point. Whether they, you know, just because they might start infighting, or part of their army might get bored and just attack you instead of doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then you have a whole situation. The only races that really put up with Greenskins on a regular basis enough to be considered like true allies are the Ogre Kingdoms. And even then, the Ogre Kingdoms ran a full extermination campaign against Greenskins for a while, very recently, because they were building up a Waagh, and they were starting to cause problems, and the Ogres were like, nope, that's not going to happen. So that's what allowed Grease's Goldtooth to claim the title as the Over-Tyrant, was that he defeated the Greenskins that were gathering up underneath a really powerful Black Orc. But, so yeah, most races really don't like them. And even if they have similar habits, they tend to go to war or be, like, best case scenario, they're attacking a mutual enemy. But that's about it. The only races that I would say genuinely like Greenskins to the point that they hang out with them are, of course, the ones that are considered a part of their roster, which are giants, trolls, giant spiders, stuff, and that's pretty much it, because everything else I think is technically a Greenskin. You know, squigs are technically Greenskins, stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully that answers that. Next up, we've got OluapPlayer, and his question is, how do Greenskins fraternize with one another in other races? Given their violent tendencies are more instinctual than malicious, are they able to form true friendships with one another? Could a Greenskin grow to respect a member of another race, even if the feeling isn't mutual? Friendship is a very foreign concept to most Greenskins. Mainly because you can never trust a Greenskin next to you not to try and challenge and kill you if they get the chance. You know, there is only one recorded instance where a Greenskin has ever felt... Well, that's not true. Greenskins are capable of feeling affection for usually, like, pets. So, you know, Scarsnake genuinely loves Goblin. And Scarsnake is the only Greenskin we have on record who ever felt depression after Goblin died. Like, he just lost his purpose. And all of his fire to keep fighting just went out. But for most Greenskins, they don't really care. It's just a game to climb to the top of the ladder, to constantly be trying to get more or get stronger or just stay entertained. And every goblin and orc even if they have what we would consider friends, they're always constantly trying to one-up each other. Either because they're either trying to kill each other or just trying to prove themselves higher up on the food chain, authority. You know, you deal with a situation like Gorfang Rockgut, for instance, has a lieutenant who he really, really liked. Like, it was genuinely his favorite guy. And Gorfang even sent him to spy on Skarsnik. And then when Gorfang meets up with him again, during the end times, Gorfang's, like, borderline greeting is that he breaks the, he shatters that orc's kneecap. Like, he just freaking destroys the dude's knee. Similar situation, Grimgor Ironhide's best friend was an orc, something Headbasha, and he was like his right hand, Borgrut Facebeater, that was his name. He was like Grimgor's right-hand man, and Grimgor killed him during the end times because, and that's very loreful because Bograt basically got too big for his britches, and Grimgor, and he started to think he could take Grimgor because they were doing so well, and Grimgor just offed him. That stuff happens constantly. The only Greenskin I know of who genuinely has what you could say are friends is Skarsnik. Skarsnik's friends are, of course, Gobla, his pet squig, and then he has a couple of lieutenants that he genuinely really likes. For instance, Duffskull, his great night goblin great shaman, who is like genuinely a friend of his. But Duffskull, like, literally almost let him die once, just because Duffskull wasn't gonna go out of his way to save him. So, you know, long story short, it's not really. As far as outside members of the species, yeah, Greenskins can definitely come to respect somebody who's known for fighting really hard. That's not a orc or a goblin. Like, they can really come to enjoy a certain enemy, but the enemy has to be really good at fighting without relying on really non-orcish tactics to have their actual respect. You know, it has to be somebody who just like plows into melee and just starts tearing people apart. And even then, to have the Greenskins respect means generally that they're going to focus you out. Like, that, having that relationship with orcs is going to draw them to you because they want to see if you're really what all the other Greenskins are talking about, and they want to see if they can best you. Like, they want to put that to the test. So if anything, that's a challenge, not a good thing to have. Next we've got Ollie here. Why did the Greenskins and dwarves clash in the beginning, and what was responsible for this lifelong conflict? So the reason the Greenskins and the dwarves started fighting is the same reason that the Greenskins fight everybody, which is that nothing is more important to them than fighting. Like, violence to them is just their true calling. It is why they exist. It is their ultimate joy in life. And plus, on top of that, Greenskins are not very good at the whole building cities or nations or anything. So their culture is very reliant on taking from others by force because they cannot create for themselves. You know, they're a culture that's purely based around raiding and sacking. So the dwarves were the first true nation of civilized beings in the old world, or what we understand to be the old world. Like, well, technically it was the lizardmen, but after the lizardmen died and or not died, but like lost their empire during the Great War against Chaos, the world was like fresh and nobody was in control, the dwarves started expanding like crazy and were the first true empire in the entirety of the old world, because all the nations of men came after that. So when the Greenskins started resurging after the lizardmen tried to exterminate them but failed, and Chaos had been defeated, the dwarves were the first thing the Greenskins ran into, and they just like immediately started attacking them without regret. And you know, back then it was pretty uncivilized orcs. You know, it was like savage orcs and savage goblins, basically. And then they started to evolve into the greenskins we know today. But for dwarves, in particular, you know, they share the same lands that the original greenskins come from, which is, you know, mountains and wasteland, you know, the Badlands, all the mountains. You know, they come from an environment where greenskins flourish, especially being like so significantly underground. So, you know, they just were natural enemies from the get-go. And we know for a fact that the very first grudge to ever be recorded in the Damaskran, or the Great Book of Grudges, was against the greenskins, or the Urk. Which also stands for... I'll put it this way. The dwarves hate the greenskins so much, and their enmity is so old, that the word Urk in Khazalid means orc, but it also just means enemy. So, like, the dwarven language, the word for enemy and orc is literally the same. Like, it's the exact same word, and it has the same meaning. It's just that you could say Urk to refer to any enemy, but it literally translates to orc. So hopefully that puts into perspective how much they hate each other. The Last Crow. What is the Greenskins' view on Beastmen? For most Greenskins, the Beastmen are just like a really enjoyable thing to fight, but it's not, and they do tend to butt heads a lot, just because they're both wandering, they both are very nomadic hordes, so they tend to run into each other on a very frequent basis on some parts of the world. For most Greenskins, the Beastmen, while being enjoyable opponents, are not generally an opponent they seek out, just because the Beastmen very rarely have anything that the Greenskins want. Like, there's nothing to burn, they don't have that great of loot, there's no resources, so generally they don't tend to bother that much with Beastmen. But if the Greenskins were, say, to discover the location of a herdstone, for instance, where the Beastmen tend to keep very large piles of loot, because that's where they tend to stash all the weapons and armor of other people they've defeated and stuff, there would be like a huge fight, as the Greenskins would happily start attacking it. And once they realized how fervently the Beastmen defend it, that would be like a whole thing. I will say, though, the exception to that is that the forest goblins hate the Beastmen. Forest goblins and Beastmen are huge not okay with each other. I would actually almost say that for the forest goblins, the Beastmen are their, like, #1 most hated enemy. And that's simply because they occupy the same space. You know, Beastmen tend to almost purely live in very, very dense forests. I mean, you can find them in other places, but most of the time, anywhere where there's Beastmen, it's usually because there's, like, big, crazy, deep forests where they thrive in, because that's their, like, natural environment. But that's also where forest goblins have as a natural environment. So those two really butt heads and do not get along at all. You will never see forest goblins like just hanging out with Beastmen. They are always competing for territory. Next up, we've got the Gentlemander. Have there ever been Greenskins that decided fighting ain't the be-all and end-all of things and tried to live a normalish life? Do they ever battle the Beastmen? We already answered all of those, but just a quick TLDR on the first part. No, to Greenskins, fighting is everything. There's no such thing as peaceful Greenskins. Jackson Hughes. He asks, how did the feuds between Greenskins and Dawi begin? Already answered that. Secondly, how did the orcs and goblins meet? So orcs and goblins are the same species. They're just... They're the same species, they're just subcategories of that species. So of the fungoid species that make up what we call greenskins, the various types are hobgoblins, goblins, gnoblars, squigs, orcs, and black orcs. Like, those are all genuinely separate subspecies. You could argue that, like, night goblins and forest goblins and savage orcs and orcs are all slightly different, but those are like the big, massive, differently ones, and they've always known each other. Like, they are kin. They look very different, but what determines what a greenskin is, like how it's born, it has to do with the spores that are, well, when greenskin spores hit the earth, basically what determines what's going to come out is the environment, which I believe we went really, really in depth into a prior episode. And I think the title was like Greenskin. It was like Greenskin breeding or Greenskin something. It should be noticeable by the title, but or it might be physiology, the physiology episodes. So if you really want to know more about that, go check that out. Jar Jar Skinks. Jar Jar Skinks. What do Greenskins think of the Skaven? The Greenskins find them to be a massive, complete, absolute nuisance at the best, and generally, but most of the time they just completely all out hate them. Orks loathe Skaven. Like they'll fight them, but Skaven are very cowardly and rely on really bizarre tactics that orcs do not find very fair. And the only thing orcs would enjoy about Skaven is if it's like Clan Moulder, because Clan Moulder's got like big scary monsters and something that's actually entertaining to fight. But for the most part, Greenskins and Skaven compete for the same territory, so they really don't get along. The only Greenskins that have ever attempted relations with the Skaven are night goblins, you know, like Skarsnik, but it tends to be very popular for night goblin tribes and Skaven to have relations, but it is constantly full of like endless backstabbing. Like they'll pretend to be an alliance, and then they'll both be trying to sabotage each other constantly. It's almost comical. Cat59 asks, what do the differing types of Greenskins think about the different primary warlord clans of the Skaven? So, the only clan that the Greenskins have any acknowledgement of being different than the others is Clan Moulder. And that's, and I guess you could argue some of the warlord clans, like probably Clan Rictus or Clan Moors. And that's simply that those are clans that heavily base themselves around a purely combat-centric design. You know, they're all about just massive hordes of melee creatures or troops. And so for the Greenskins, those guys are really fun to fight, so they tend to draw a lot of Greenskin opponents. That's why of all the Skaven cities, the ones that are owned by warlord clans or Clan Moulder, so Hell Pit, or Clan Moulder subsidiary clans, so Hell Pit, Crookback Peak or Crookback Mountain, and Carrick 8 Peaks are you know, the fortresses of those kinds of Skaven, and they're constantly under attack by Greenskins because those kinds of opponents draw Greenskins to them, who view them as like a really, really fun opponent, and they are always under assault by Greenskin tribes. Whereas Clan Pestilence and, well, Scryer has the benefit of being in Skaven Blight, but the clans that tend to rely much more on stealth or magic or shooting do not have nearly as interesting or deep of a relationship with the Greenskins as the fighting ones do. Dat Orc Boss asks, of all the gits in the Warhammer world, what do the boys like fighting the most? Is it different for different kinds of Greenskins? So, yes, it's different depending on the it is definitely different depending on the Greenskins. I would say their favorite opponents, most Greenskins don't really have a favorite opponent so much as, well, okay, so for Black Orcs who only care about hardcore fighting, their favorite opponent by far is, I would say, either Dwarves or the Warriors of Chaos. I think they would pick the Warriors of Chaos if they were able to pick anybody, but they don't get to fight each other too often just because they tend to be in very different spaces. For Forest Goblins, I think if they could pick an enemy to attack so that they could just like go at them, it'd probably be Beastmen. Like, they tend to fight the most. Savage Orcs by far fight the most with Dwarves, unless you're dealing with Savage Orcs in Lestria, in which case it's Lizardmen. Night Goblins, 100% Dwarves, or Skaven. Night Goblins very much enjoy fighting Skaven, but they also get a real kick out of fighting Dwarves, so it'd be one of those two. For regular goblins that travel the plains and the hills and stuff, I'd probably say humans or like the Empire, border princes, stuff like that make the most ideal opponents for those kind of goblins. And then for classic orcs, I'd probably say men, either humans or dwarves. One of those two. It would probably be their favorite opponents. I'd say for classic orcs, probably stuff like Bretonia or dwarves would be the best way to focus down on that. Chaos Berserker. Same question, which we just answered. Citizen Kane. I've noticed in Total War Warhammer in the diplomacy screen that certain Greenskin factions may have the Vampiric influence trait. I was wondering if vampires and other factions manipulating the Greenskins into doing what they want in the lore, and if there's any good examples of this. So the reason the Vampiric influence trait exists is because it's very specifically referring to Azhag the Slaughterer and him having Nagash's Crown of Sorcery. And it's literally being that there was once a time when there were Greenskins who were very, very heavily influenced by that significant relationship with Nagash. So they would be much more likely to have positive interactions with the vampires, either to, and it, you know, theoretically, it would be difficult to specifically say which side is influencing the other. However, a surprising amount of destruction factions, being the bad guys, influence Greenskins on a very regular basis, because Greenskins are pretty easy to manipulate. Now, the thing about Greenskins is that manipulating them can be very dangerous, because if they figure it out, they don't tend to take to it too kindly, and will usually attack you out of spite. And the other thing is that a lot of people who try and manipulate Greenskins grossly underestimate how deadly and destructive Greenskins can be, and they end up like spiraling out of control and just start breaking everything instead of the stuff they're supposed to be attacking. So they can end up becoming more of a hindrance than a positive. The races that I would say are the most notorious for influencing Greenskins are definitely the Vampire Counts. I would actually say the Vampire Counts are probably the best at manipulating Greenskins. They're very, very good at it. Also, another reason that Vampire Counts and Greenskins are said to have a very famous relationship is because of the city of Morcane. So we talked about it last episode, but Morcane was one of the greatest vampiric nations to ever exist, next to Sylvania and Lamia, and it was destroyed by the Greenskins, right? A bunch of savage orcs came in and wiped it out. However, because the ruins were so incredibly steeped in dark magic due to all the necromancy, it basically polluted the land so bad it created a place known as the Marshes of Madness, which you can actually see on the Total War Warhammer map. If you go to if you play Malagor the Dark Omen and go to his start position, that weird super evil looking swamp he's in that looks like it should be its own province but isn't and has a ruin in the middle of it, that's the Marshes of Madness, which was like the capital of the Empire of Morcane. And the Greenskins there were heavily influenced by all of that necromantic energy, and it caused them to have a very weird symbiotic relationship with undeath, in that they are capable of being influenced by vampires, and people who go there will there's a lot of artifacts and things like that that were taken by the Greenskins that led to them having a lot of vampiric influence. And probably the best game that went really into depth with that lore-wise was Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning. There was a whole zone dedicated to the Marshes of Madness that was very heavily about that relationship between the Greenskins and the ruins of Morcane. And they had a dungeon called Red Eye Mountain, aka Karak Ungor, which also had a lot of lore about artifacts from Morcane that the Greenskins took back with them, or some Greenskins like went south and it somehow wandered up there, that allowed them to get some really nasty powers. But there was like a really weird relationship because of that. So that's what that trait refers to, is that some Greenskins do have a very notable influence to vampirism, or to vampire counts or necromancers or things like that, because of that ancient tie to Morcane, and of course Azhag the Slaughterer. So, but yeah, a lot of destruction races do manipulate the Greenskins. The most successful at it by far, vampire counts. Second place, I would say, is probably Dark Elves, or Skaven. I would probably say second place is Skaven, third place is Dark Elves. And then somewhere a little ways down in fourth place would be Warriors of Chaos. Shockwave 69. Do Greenskins have any relations or opinions on other races beyond just wanting to fight them? It seems like they hate dwarves especially and have allied Skaven before to fight the dwarves. Okay, so we already answered all those. Yes, Skaven and Greenskins have teamed up numerous times, almost always against the dwarves. It's either against dwarves or humans, with almost no exception. But it's 99% of the time against dwarves. And we already answered the first part of your question about their relationships to other races. Cube, have the Greenskins ever teamed up with another race in battle? Yes, all the time. Greenskins have purposefully fought alongside Skaven and Ogre Kingdoms on a very, very normal amount of occasions. Usually against people like dwarves, elves, humans, or warriors of chaos, or demons of chaos. But these alliances are always very, very short-lived and conditional. And there's usually backstabbing involved very, very quickly. So, and we talked about in a prior video that a lot of the times Greenskins are more of like, they kind of just wander into the situation as opposed to like deliberately making a treaty or something. And then the last question for this video is from Rickados, who asks, who are the orcs' favorite and least favorite enemies? So we already talked about their favorites, but their least favorites are people who don't play fair. So for all goblins are afraid or terrified of elves. Goblins are very, very spooked by elves, and we talked about that yesterday. But they find elves like almost as like horrifying supernatural abominations. So for them, elves by far their least favorite opponent. Very, very spooky, scary, all that stuff. For orcs, I'd say for most orcs, it's probably still elves. It'd either be elves or chaos dwarves. Chaos dwarves are very, very scary to Greenskins because there's a lot of ancient hatred between those two races, as chaos dwarves, their number one slave population is Greenskins by an absurd margin. And the chaos dwarves also employ hobgoblins, who Greenskins also hate very, very much due to that whole situation, which we talked about in a prior video. And chaos dwarves also fight dirty. Like, they are purely about super crazy heavy armor, super hardcore shooting that specializes in wiping out hordes, and some of the most devastating magic in the world. So for Greenskins are terrified of chaos dwarves and genuinely hate them. Like, not a hatred is like they have with dwarves, where they have an ancient ancestral hatred, but they really enjoy fighting them. They just despise the chaos dwarves and just want to wipe them out. They don't even like fighting them. So I would say for orcs, chaos dwarves; for goblins, elves, for least favorites. And that will wrap up today's video. We went a little over time, but not too bad. So I'll see you guys tomorrow for the 40K episode, which I think a lot of you guys are going to be looking forward to because we had an assload of 40K questions. So thank you all for watching. See you tomorrow.